Manipulating text. Although Excel is well known for its mathematical capabilities and features, it also has some powerful tools for creating text formulas to manipulate text. We're going to take this lesson and learn some of the text functions and formulas, then teach you how they're used. More specifically, we'll show you how to use them. In this lesson, we'll learn about the left and right functions, the len and trim functions, the find and mid functions, concatenate functions, changing case functions, replace, substitute, char and text functions, and preserving string values. Two of the most common text functions you'll come across in Excel are left and right. These functions are used to extract text data from a worksheet. For example, it's not uncommon for businesses to use the first three letters of an employee's name for identification purposes and payroll. Someone with the last name Anderson might be listed and followed by the three last digits of their social security number. They may be listed for payroll purposes as AND325. We can use the left and right text function to extract the first three characters of their last name. Let's take a look at how this works by using this worksheet here. We're going to use the left function to extract the first three letters of each employee's last name. We start a text function in the same way that we start a mathematical function. We can now see the parameters, which are the text we wish to use and the number of characters we want to appear. Select the cell that contains the text, followed by the number of characters, which is 3, and then press enter. The first three letters of the last name are now in the cell. We'll show you how to combine that with the last three numbers of the social security number later in this lesson. For now, let's look at the right function. The right function extracts the characters from the end of the text. So instead of the first three letters of the last name, it'll be the last three letters. We start out by entering the equal sign and then the word right. The parameters are the same as with the left function. Select the cell that has text and then enter the number 3. Now that we've covered the left and right functions, let's talk about two more text functions. They're the len and trim functions. Sometimes when you import data into Excel, there can be spaces at the end of data in the cell that you can't see. If you're trying to use the right function to extract the last four letters of text, you may end up seeing some values that have 3 letters and some that have 4. For example, if we put a space at the end of this value here, we can see that it only takes the last 2 letters of the name, because there's actually a space at the end of Anderson that we can't see. There's a reason for this. When we import data into Excel, there were some spaces at the end of some of the strings of text. So when the right function counted for 4 characters from the right, it also counted a space that we didn't know was there in 2 instances of our worksheet. That's why only 3 characters are showing. When you import data into Excel, it's typically best to use the trim function for cells that contain text. That way, if you want to manipulate that text later using either right or left, the spaces will no longer be there. That said, we can use the trim function for the text data that we might have imported. Let's add 2 new columns for this. We want to give it the same column names. Let's enter the trim function. It only requires one parameter, which is the text. The employee's first name appears. However, there are no invisible spaces. Return to the cell that we've just added the formula and drag the cell down to fill the remaining cells. Then let's do the same with the last column. However, now there's a problem. We have 2 columns for both the first and last name. If we try to delete the columns that contain the imported data, since we don't need them anymore, we'll get a ref error. We could enter the names instead of the cell references, but that would be a lot of work. All names have to be entered individually. Instead, the best way to do this is not to create the 2 extra columns, but instead embed the trim function in with the right function. Let's delete these 2 columns that we've just added. Now we can add the right function and tell Excel we want to add the last 3 characters of the last name. Now we want to add the trim function so that it trims the spaces from the last name here. Once you enter that, Excel takes you back to the right function and prompts you for the number of characters parameter. As you can see, it puts in the last 3 letters of that name, even though there's a space at the end of it. The len function tells you how many characters are in a string. Len is short for length. Let's see how many characters there are in the last name Anderson. As you can see, it only requires one parameter. We're going to click on the cell in B2. Close the brackets and press enter. We can see there are 9 characters in the last name Anderson. This is because there's still a space at the end. Let's remove the space, and then we can see there are only 8 characters in the last name Anderson. We can copy these formulas down to the remaining cells. Take a look at this worksheet here. As you can see, we have a list of image file names. We want to remove the .jpg from the end so that only the name of the picture shows up in the next column. The first thing we're going to do is determine the length of each file name by using the len function. Next, we're going to use the left function and enter the text parameter. First is the text, and then the second parameter, we're going to enter the length found in cell B2 and subtract the number of characters in .jpg, which is 4. Now press enter. If we drag the cells down to get the rest of the formulas into those cells, we now have our image file names without the .jpg after them. If we didn't want to have a column for the length in our worksheet, we could simply embed the len function in with the left function. So instead of B2, we would have len of that cell there. As you can see, it gives the same results. The find function gives you the start position of one text string within another, and then displays a number which represents the character from which the search string starts. The mid function lets you extract from a text string from the middle of a string and continue for a specified number of characters. Let's learn how both functions work, starting with the find function. Have a look at the example here. As you can see, we have a list of email addresses. We want to extract the domains from the list in order to find out which domains our friends are using. To do this, first we have to use the find function to 1. Find the @ sign, and 2. Determine where it occurs in the string. For example, the third character of the string. We'll use the find function for this. So let's start the function. Now we see the parameters for the formula. First, we need to tell Excel what we want to find. We want to find the @ sign within the email address. The next parameter within text is asking where Excel needs to look for the text. We select the cell that contains the email address. The parameter start num is optional. You'll use it to tell Excel to start searching at a certain number of characters into the string. If you're looking for several instances of the character, it's helpful to use. We don't need to do that, so we'll just add a closing bracket and press enter. Our @ symbol occurs 8 characters into the string. Next, let's start the mid function. We're going to use this function to extract the domain that comes after the @ symbol. We can now see the parameters. The first parameter is the text that we want to manipulate. This is the cell that contains the email address. The next parameter is the start num. This is the number of the first character that we want to extract. That character will be the first one after the @ sign. We want one more than that. So click on the next cell, B2, then add +1. Finally, the third parameter, numchars, is the number of characters that we want to extract from the string. Since everyone's domain name has a different number of characters, this is impossible to know. In order to find out how many characters we need to extract, we'll subtract the number of characters before the @ sign from the number of characters in the email address. This will leave us with the number of characters that remain after the @ sign. Now press enter. Now you can see the domain. Drag the handle in this cell to see how it looks compared to the other email addresses. In the first section of this lesson, we mentioned that it's not uncommon for a business to combine the first 3 letters of an employee's last name with a string of numbers to come up with an employee ID. In our worksheet here, we have a list of employees with their social security numbers. Let's also use the left and right functions to extract the first 3 characters from their last name and the last 3 characters from their social security numbers. What we want to do now is combine the characters in the ab last column with those in the ab ssn column. We'll do this using the concatenate function. You can see that we've started to add the function here. Now select the text that we want to use for this function. We want to combine the cells in D2 and E2. Close the brackets and press enter. If we wanted to add a space between the two different strings of characters, we would add spaces between the cells in the formula by using a quote, then a space, and then another quote. That said, if we didn't want to have columns D and E to our worksheet, we could embed the left and right functions within the concatenate function. Let's try to do that. There's our left function. Now let's do our right function. You can then complete the worksheet. Using text functions, you can change your text to uppercase, lowercase, or title case. To change text to all uppercase, we can use the upper function. As you can see, it's now changed its name to uppercase. To change it to lowercase, we use the lower function. To change it to title case, we use the proper function. Now let's go back to our employee IDs here. We want to make the first 3 letters of the employee ID all uppercase. To do that, we need to embed the upper function. So inside our concatenate function, we put upper around the left function here. Now we can drag the handle down to complete the worksheet. The replace and substitute functions are a lot alike, however, they're not exactly the same thing. To show you what we mean, we're going to show you how each of these functions work. In this worksheet here, we want to use the replace function to add the employee ID after the first part of their email address. To do this, let's start the replace function. The first parameter is old text, or the cell that contains the text we want to manipulate. The start num is where we want to start adding the new text. This would be the @ symbol for all email addresses, so we use the find function to find it. The parameter numchars asks for how many characters we want to replace. We don't want to replace any, so we put 0. The new text is the new text we want to add. That is the employee ID. Close the brackets and press enter. The substitute function can be used to get the same result. Let's start the substitute function. First, we want to enter the text we want to manipulate. For this example, it's the email address. Next, we enter the old text we want to replace with the new text. We'll enter the @ sign. Now we enter the new text we want to add. This is the employee ID, as well as the @ symbol. We have to add the @ symbol back in to the email address. We use a cell reference, and then an ampersand, and then the @ symbol to do this. The parameter instance num is optional. It wants to know which instance of the @ symbol we want to replace. Since it only appears once, we don't need to worry about this. So we just add the closing bracket and press enter. The char function lets you add characters to a string that aren't on your keyboard. In addition, it allows you to add carriage return to strings. For example, you can add a carriage return to an address to break it up into 2 lines. Have a look at our worksheet here. We want to combine these 2 strings into one, then add a carriage return. To do this, we'll start by entering the concatenate function. Now we need to create a carriage return between cell A and cell B. To do this, we'll use the char function. With the char function, we add a number between 1 and 255 to get the character we need. We need a carriage break, and this is number 10. You can see we inserted the char function between the two cell references, which is where we want our line break. So press enter. Since there are 255 different characters that you can insert with the char function, it's impossible to list them all in this course. However, you'll find a char functions workbook included with the course that contains all the functions that you can insert. We already know how to format dates, text and numbers in cells using Excel. That's easy enough to do without a function. However, we cannot format a date or text if a cell contains both. For example, in our worksheet here we've used the concatenate function to put Jim's name and then his birthday. As you can see, Excel entered a number instead of a birth date. This number is the count of days since Excel's beginning count date, which is January 1st, 1900. To format the date, we'll use the text function. We want to insert it before the date in the formula. As you can see, we use the MMDDYYYY to tell Excel which date format to use. If we wanted to write out the month, we would have entered 4 M's. To format the numbers with text function, use zeros or commas, if needed. For example, 20,000 would be 0,0000 in the text function. In this lesson, we've learned to use functions to manipulate text. We've created several cells with functions in them that extract and combine text. This is great as far as our worksheet goes, but the problem comes when you need to copy and paste a column that you've created using these functions to another worksheet. You'll get ref errors. This is because we're pasting a relative path. Let's try and paste our employee numbers into a different sheet. You can see the ref column errors that we have. To fix this, click on the drop down below the paste option on the Home tab. Choose values and number formatting from the paste values section. You can see that our employee IDs now appear.